a world where we have everything and it's still not enough, we're often left wondering, is this really it?
Deep inside, you know there's more to life. You're ready to leave behind the old push your way through and claim the deeper, more meaningful life that's calling you.
That's what we invite you to explore with us.
We're your hosts,
Stephanie Allen
and Maren Stephanie. And this is the Soulful Leader Podcast.
Yay! Hi, welcome to the Soulful Leader Podcast. This is Stephanie, and I'm here with Maren. And today we're talking about mistakes. Ooh, those dreaded mistakes. How we love and hate them. Actually, I don't know if we really love them, but you're gonna love them after we talk about them, because mistakes can be such a great doorway for growth and understanding. But it really requires that we let go of the self-judgment. We let go of the harshness, and we have to practice really listening to what it is that is in our heart, and literally letting go of the shoulda, woulda, coulda, ought tos.
I think so much of it is related to this perfectionism thing that we have as a culture and that we've adopted personally, right? It's one thing to say the culture has it, right? Well, when the culture has it, that means that it's existing inside of me too. And it does exist inside of me. I really do feel that perfectionism program of like, oh, I can't make a mistake. I have to be perfect.
Yeah. Where did this ever happen that you had to do it like perfect right out of the blocks, you know? Like,
it is so interesting because like when you think of original learning, which was passed down from generation to generation to generation, and there were guilds and people were taught through apprenticeships, not in mass schools. Apprentices were not expected to have things perfect. Like the reason that there was an apprenticeship is you learned a little bit at a time, and you were expected to make mistakes, and you were expected to learn from that. And that was, you learned the process of here's how learning happens is you do it wrong. You learn how to do it right. You do it better. Still not quite right. You learn how to do it, but and so it was this a constant evolution. This Carol Dweck calls it a growth mindset, and that growth mindset somewhere along the line got like warped, and we became a very fixed mindset society.
Well, I also wonder too if it isn't just we want everything yesterday. Like we're so impatient. We don't, like I remember the old times when internet first started and someone would send you a picture over the dial-up network. And you might as well go out and do your laundry and have supper and then come back and maybe part of the picture was shown up. I mean, that took a long time, but now it's not there in literally, I don't even know the term of it, like less than a millisecond. We're impatient.
Right.
And so when did all of this happen then? And when we're so impatient, there's no room for mistakes. There's no room for possibilities. There's no room for conversation. And I John Maxwell has a great way around leadership when you're talking about the apprentice and apprenticing off into someone. He said, true leadership is, I'm going to show you how I do it. I've reached a certain level of mastery. So I'm going to show you how I do it. You're going to watch and you're going to ask questions. And then you're going to do it, and I'm going to watch, and I'm going to ask you questions. And then they do it on their own without you. It's like, and that doesn't just happen like 3 times. Like that may happen over an evolution of quite some time.
Right. So like the way you make it sound is like, okay, I do it once and you watch. You do it once and I watch, and then whoop, you're on your own.
Exactly.
And true apprenticeship is not like that. Like apprentices watch for years and years, and then they are watched for years
and years.
And then even the step after that, there's actually 2 parts to the step after that of you do it on your own. You do it on your own and check in with me and bring it back. That doesn't mean that you're a master now. Like you do it on your own and keep bringing it back and keep bringing it back. And then eventually you become a master. And now you're the one who's passing on the knowledge. Right. And even one of my personal choices through my life is I've always chosen to work with coaches who have coaches. So even at the point of mastery, there's still something to learn. And I think
Always.
that that's something that gets lost in the translation, as if, oh, I've arrived and I
Yeah,
have
like, it's
nothing
like,
left
oh,
to learn. I
you
can't
get
make
to this,
mistakes anymore.
yeah, you get to this end place, and yeah, like, there's no grace even with yourself. It's like, oh, I screwed up. And it reminds me of a story of my mom. My mom was a dancer when she was a little girl, and she did Highland dancing. And I live in Nova Scotia, New Scotland in Latin. And there's a lot of the gathering of the clans, which is where the Highland dancers would get up and they would do their dancing. And she was just a little girl at the time. And I think it was her first time actually dancing on stage for a competition. And she kept getting told to come back and do it again. And she thought she was making mistakes. And she's like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I get this right? And they would ask her again, do it again, do it again, do it. And I don't know how many times she had to do it again. And then finally she won a medal. And she didn't realize that in the doing it again was actually that she was progressing. She was actually elevating herself to the next group to do it again. And they kept picking her. And I think about that in the way of mistakes. And I think, isn't it interesting how sometimes we default to, oh my God, I screwed up, I made a mistake. Just like my mother did dancing. Instead of, what if it was, no, actually, you are fine tuning, you are tweaking it, and we like what we're seeing so far, and you're moving to the next stage, the next development to try it again at a whole new level. And I think if we presence that model a little bit differently, I think we'd be a lot kinder with ourselves and with each other. And it wasn't about a one and done.
I think we would have so much more joy in the process, for one thing. And the other is, where might it take us? Because how often do we stop doing something because we feel like we're bad at it? And there's an embarrassment and a shame and an I can't and no, I shouldn't. So we stop ourselves long before, like, we would even know if we're actually good or not, or if it brings us joy or not, because we never got out of the shame part of it. We're in that, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm making mistakes.
And as long as we're in that shame part and we think we're making mistakes and we're failing horribly, there is no space for kindness or generosity or growth or connection and intimacy. I think of that in relationship when someone says, look, how many times have I told you not to leave that dirty sink? Leave that thing or
The
do
dishes
that,
in the sink.
yeah,
right?
exactly.
The sock on the floor.
And sometimes we take it personally and think like, God, I've told you like 10 times. And then we take it personally and we say, they're not listening to me. They don't care about me. And it's like, the other person's like, damn, I'm freaking trying. I'm a hot mess and I have a hard time. Like, my mind is everywhere. And sometimes I forget. I'm so sorry. I'm really working on it. And it's like, instead of having the space of like, okay, well, what can we do to make this easier? Like, how can we set this up differently? And there's a growth opportunity. But I think because we're so conditioned that we have to be perfect right out of the get-go, that there's no space for what ifs. Or can we work through this? Or I'm trying and I'm working with this. I think it's just so unfortunate that we're this one and done society and we throw things out so easily. We talked about that in one of our other podcasts, like just the disposable. But I think we dispose of ourselves.
We do. Yeah, I think that there's really a few layers to it. And two of those layers is how we treat somebody else, right? As leaders, that's one of the things that we talk about all the time, right? How we're treating those around us. And then, the podcast that we recently did about leading yourself, it's how do I treat myself like that? Mm-hmm. Because if I'm wanting to not treat somebody else like that, the first place that I need to look is I'm probably treating myself like that.
Oh my gosh. And that is the one that you actually can change, the easiest and the most beautiful. And sometimes we distract ourselves with everything else so that we don't even look at that part.
Sometimes.
Okay, most of the time. So interesting, I just got a text earlier today from a friend of mine who has gone for a new job. And, it's funny because he was really anxious about going for this new job. And I said, well, what are you anxious about? Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like, you could actually get the job. Like, how could this be about? You already have a job, so it's not like you're risking anything. And he's like, well, I don't want to lie. Being true is really important to me. It's a value to me. And I'm like, yeah, that is so great, And I said, so why don't we practice? What could you say or what could you do? Anyway, the text that came today is like, oh my God, I'm almost sick to my stomach. I lied. And I said, what do you mean you lied? What did you say? and kind of made up the story that he, instead of just saying, I have an appointment, like the company called and asked him to come in for an interview. And instead of just saying, I have an appointment to his employer, I have an appointment that I need to go early tomorrow. He said, well, I have a doctor's appointment, or he kind of made up all this other thing around a medical issue or whatever. And then as soon as he did it, he felt sick to his stomach. And I'm like, I'm kind of half laughing because I'm like, way to go. First of all, way to go. I said, you are really getting out of your comfort zone and you're going for a job and you're stepping up to something that is more true towards you. I said, but you panicked, didn't you? You didn't know what to say. Yeah. And this is what happens. We default back to our old patterns. So it's not that we want to be perfect right out of the gate. I'm not saying that. It's like to know what your default patterns are. This is the key, is the awareness. Without awareness, there's no choice, there's no freedom, there's no change. But the moment you're aware of something, like if you are aware that you have a pattern of just, I say this a lot, is that sometimes thoughts come in and go right out your mouth before they've actually had a moment to kind of marinate. And you're like, oh shit, did I say that out loud? Right. We have these moments, right? Well, if you're aware of that, then you can say, okay, I'm aware that that happens with me. What can I do differently? How can I slow that process down? Like maybe I need to talk it over with somebody, or kind of like role play, or have some scenarios, or just even write it out, journal it out. Like take some process for yourself to kind of slow it down and distill it. Because what you're doing, and of course it never is going to come out the way you have practiced it, by the way. That's the other part of it. But you've practiced it, which means at least it's now in this distilling and the marinating phase, rather than the reactive, let's just throw that oil on the the gasoline on the fire and let's explode this thing. It's like that can be an old pattern that we want to change.
It's interesting because one of the things that that's something that when I would get nervous, I would feel very, what's the word, like justified. Somebody would send me an email that like made me nervous or that got me anxious, and I would want to respond, and instead I would react. What I mean by that is like I would fire off an email right back. And so what I started doing was I had a second email account that it's my spam email account. I never check it. It's what I use for spam, for places that if they require an email address and I don't want to give it, I give them that one because I never check it, right? So what I started doing was I would fire off the response to my own email instead of to them. And then I would make myself wait an hour or a day or whatever it was, depending on how much I was worked up, right? Before I read it. And when I would go into that other email, I'm looking at it from a different perspective because it's not in my send file. It's in I received this. And I found that I really actually read it very differently because it was something that I received. And I was like, what does it feel like to receive this? And
that's a great practice.
I would completely, I can't think of any one of those that I did that I didn't completely rewrite and go, God, I'm so glad I didn't send that.
Well, I think this is such a couple of good examples. One, the example of, we do tend to react, and then what comes out of us is really not what we would like to say. What we really
wanted to say.
Or what is really a deeper, kinder, more impactful thing.
Or even a more authentic. Like, right. That's not who I am.
It's not who you want to be either.
Yeah.
So it's like to allow yourself some space for choice, to really step into, well, what kind of leader do I want to be? What kind of being do I want to be? And then allow yourself to be in the other person's shoes, so to speak, by receiving it and then having, now, how did I receive that? How did I take that in? If that was coming like from someone else. And I'm like, and again, we're so conditioned to have instantaneous response. It's like, come on, I just texted you. Why haven't you texted me back? I'm waiting. And sometimes it does need to have that space of like, just give me some give me some time, give me some space here for a moment because I need to slow down to just really look at that. Now, sometimes people will say that, oh, I just need time and space. And that's kind of their way of like getting off the hook so that they don't have to deal with it. But I think honestly, if you really said, I do need some time and space, to really give yourself a time limit within that, say, can I respond by tomorrow morning? Or, next week, whatever you need, but that you actually put a time limit on it so that in that time you are actually practicing, really looking at it and speaking it or writing it or feeling it from a different perspective.
The other thing that it would allow me to do is, for example, your client or your friend who wanted, they fired off a response and then felt guilty about it. Like, so I would fire off the response to myself and then I would know what my feelings were about that. So I would have that's part of the reason that I waited an hour or a day, or, like I said, before I would go read it. Because if I sent it and immediately read it, it's like more justification for, yes, that's right. Right. So I would actually take that hour and marinate in how did it feel to send that? And there would already be regrets of like, ooh, well, maybe I should have said that differently, And then when I would read it, then I would be in a different place. I'd be a different person than the person who wrote it. So I would get to experience both of those. Yeah.
Great practices. And this is where, having a coach or having a friend or someone else to actually kind of witness it with you. And why I'm saying this is that you also need to be in choice of the type of person you're going to choose to witness it with you. If it's another person who's just going to be like, yeah, you deserve better than that, and that's what you should have said, and la, 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 probably not such a good coach. But to have someone who's neutral, who's not invested in the outcome either way, that is actually invested in you becoming your more beautiful, extraordinary self, rather than just a reactive hot mess, which is where I have been many times in my life too. I know this one. But again, coming back to mistakes, it's like, God, if you don't step out of your comfort zone and you don't make mistakes, how will you ever evolve or grow? And then, you get older, your birth age gets older, but you actually still acting like you did when you were 7, 8, 9, 10. This is not helpful, especially when you're leading a family or a business or an organization of some sort, or even just leading yourself, and you want to grow and you want to have something different.
I like the movie industry for this example of they have a little clapboard and it's take 1, take 2, take 3, take that, right? And it's a missed take. That's all it is. So you missed the take. And that is standard when we make a movie or when we do a TV show or when we, it's like there are, it's like one of the things that many people talk about is like, wow, we did that in one take. There are those times in life where it's like, yeah, I got it the first time through. Wow. Most of the time we don't get it the first time through, and that's okay. That means that we learned something. Like your friend, he learned that I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And there's another option, right? So we learn.
But not to beat yourself up by it. It's like, okay, you just learned that you didn't want to do that.
Right.
Great. That's a great learning. So what did you learn and what could you do differently next time? Not about a right, wrong perfectionist, but like just a discovery. And, that's why even when they do the mistakes in the movie, they go, hey, let's try it from this angle. Let's try it from that angle. Let's try embodying, this kind of character rather than that character. Like you get to try out some different things to see which one really resonates.
Yeah. And imagine like either a workforce or, even in your family of this is the way of being of course, like we're experimenting. Like this is a game. Let's experiment. Let's play with it. And instead of, I get it that there are high stakes. And there are places to experiment and there are places where you don't experiment. Like if I'm going into surgery, I don't want the doctor going, hey, let's play, let's experiment, right?
Like, oops, made a mistake.
Right?
Cut the artery. Sorry about that.
So, and getting to that point so that you are the person who under pressure knows how to do that thing. That's years and years and years of mistakes. Michael Jordan has some amazing quote along those lines about, like all the last minute shots that were put on him that he missed in order so that he could have the few that he actually made that made all the difference in the world. Right?
Yeah,
it doesn't just happen. It's training. And it's training making the mistakes. And that's life, right?
I think the hardest part is that when we give up. When we give up on ourselves or we give up on another person because they keep making mistakes, it's like, I think that's what's sad. It's like, instead of saying, okay, congratulations, you're making all kinds of mistakes, like one of Daniel Goodenough, one of our coaches ourselves always says, make lots of mistakes and do them quickly.
Yeah. Fail often and as quickly as possible.
As possible. It's great. And it's like, I think if we had that kind of mindset in our world, I think there'd be we'd have a lot more beauty in our lives, actually, and a lot more humor. Because I think, when we can also laugh at ourselves, it's like, oh my God, that was extraordinary. Whoops. And to be able to laugh and take it seriously too, but not so seriously that we're beating ourselves up or another person.
Yeah. I have another exercise that I had given to a client just the other day, and it kind of looks at it from a slightly different perspective of what if all the things that we consider mistakes, the things that we look back and we have regrets. Well, maybe I did this right. Maybe I did it wrong. And we question ourselves. And what if it all was perfect? So that you were actually meant to become the person that you were today for whatever purpose is coming next. And you wouldn't have if you had made a different choice. So when we look back on our lives or look back on, even last week of like, what if actually I was meant to make that decision? Or like, for example, your friend, what if I was meant to say that so that I could learn, so that I could become a different person? Because sometime in the future, then maybe the near future or the distant future, if I were to say that, it would be really hurtful.
So that reminds me of a story that I have. Personal story that I have about making mistakes. When I was in China studying to be an acupuncturist, I was learning how to do cupping. And you take almost looks like a mason jar, like a glass jar, and you basically dip the wand in alcohol and you light it on fire. Except for I didn't wring out the cotton ball, and the rim of the cup also got on fire, which it doesn't. And I put it on the person, which also had a lot of alcohol on the person, and I set the person on fire. Yeah, you laugh, but I was like, I literally broke down, and I broke down. I was horrified. I sat, and the man was in his 90s. I was like, this is somebody's grandfather. I was like, I started to cry and cry and cry. I could uncontrollably. And of course, it's in China, so I can't speak Chinese. And this lovely man who I just set on fire said, I'm just so grateful that you've come to learn my culture's medicine. And for the next 2 days, I couldn't even go back to class because I was like, I can't go back to class. I'm too ashamed. I made a huge boo-boo. And so I went in, and my Chinese doctor said to me, she's like, so what did you learn? And I kind of gave a whole list of things that I learned. And she said, you know what? You're never going to set another person on fire. If anything, you told, like, no, I promise you, I will never do it. I was traumatized. I was traumatized.
Right.
But it's so interesting because now, and I love doing cupping now, and I'm really great at it, but I learned so much from that mistake that I'm a good mentor on showing other people, well, what not to do. Don't do this. Here's what you want to do. Because if you don't, this could happen. And I'm saving you a lot of pain. And that's that whole idea of the apprenticing. And so God loved that man that sacrificed his body for me to set it on fire. Like I learned so much about burns. I learned so much about how to treat burns. I learned so much. God love him. I learned so much, and my heart broke wide open to be even more willing to learn. So I think you're right when you say about if we go back and we look at those mistakes, like how they are opening the doorway to some sort of mastery.
Right.
And I've also heard that those where you struggle the most in your life, whether it's finances, whether it's relationships, whether it's health, whatever it might be, that's actually where your greatest gift and potential lies. And so if we avoid making mistakes, if we avoid stepping out of our comfort zone in those areas, then you will miss uncovering that gift that is buried within your soul. That's your true self.
And it's so interesting because those are probably the areas we avoid the most. We avoid trying to like, oh, I'm going to make a mistake. I'm not going to like, I'm already bad at that. I'm horrible at it. It's like, it's a traumatic thing for me. I'm just going to avoid that, so that's interesting. And thank you for sharing that story because it's entertaining for me, for one. And it illustrates perfectly of like, the things that we think are mistakes, when we can look at them and tell a different story about them and keep telling higher and higher versions of that story of like, you know what? It was absolutely meant to be. And it made me who I am today, and because I am who I am today, probably a lot of other people were not set on fire.
Well, exactly. Because not only do you learn from your own mistakes, you learn from other people's mistakes. I'll give you another funny example. I was on an airplane once and this woman went to the washroom. You know how bloody small those flipping bathrooms are on the airplane. And she had a dress on and she came out of the bathroom and she had tucked her dress into her panties.
Sure.
Right? So like the long part behind you was now tucked up into her panties. So she's walking down the aisle, but her bare bum was basically showing.
Oh, no.
I'll tell you, that traumatized me too, because now every time I go to the bathroom, I'm like, okay, is my shirt stuck in my panties? I double check all the time. And so God love her for being, the sacrificial lamb of like, check twice before you leave the bathroom at the airport, anywhere. I just think we can learn so much from each other.
Yeah.
And that we're so caught up in trying to be perfect. And yet it's our mistakes. And I mean, that's also where the humor lasts too. I mean, like the funny things that have happened in our lives are often where there's been crazy ass mistakes that have turned into great conversational pieces.
They're fantastic. I mean, when you look at people who are writers, they're looking for this stuff because you can't make it up. Right? That's
exactly.
great.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I love this. Looking at mistakes differently. I would love to hear, your stories, our listeners, when you're out there. So you can share your stories with us on Facebook or on LinkedIn or at the Soulful Leaders. And I would love to hear, where are some things in your life where at the time you might have thought it was a horrible mistake and later you realized, wow, I'm so glad that happened. I think we've had that conversation a couple of times. And, with our perfectionist society, the way that it is, it's so important that we keep revisiting this and telling ourselves and telling each other, wait, this is important. We're meant to make mistakes. We're meant to. So,
yeah. So give yourself permission to make some wild mistakes and also give yourself permission to laugh at yourself and love yourself through that and say, okay, what did I just learn from that? That was extraordinary.
Yeah.
Like, go for it.
So much power. So much power there. Well, thank you. And thank you all for listening. Remember, you can find us at thesoulfulleaderpodcast.com. You can find us on all your favorite platforms. And we would love it if you'd share this with a friend, with a colleague, with somebody that you know that might be interested. So, and we'll see you all next week on the Soulful Leader Podcast.
And that wraps up another episode of the Soulful Leader Podcast with your hosts, Stephanie Allen
and Maren Oslack. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to dive deeper, head over to our website at thesoulfulleaderpodcast.com.
Until next time.